Good afternoon and welcome to this Marfund webinar series. Thank you for joining us for this edition. It is a pleasure to have you all join us here today in this webinar. As you know, today we are going to be talking about a very important ecosystem that we have forgotten a bit, which is seagrass. And we're going to talk about regional experiences and lessons learned. So, to do a little bit of uh, housekeeping, we're going to share a few instructions regarding interpretation because this webinar is going to be presented in both English and Spanish. So, please find the option of the language you need to be able to hear us. And if you want to mute original audio to listen only to the interpretation, then you can click it. These are some basic rules for the webinar. We encourage a space of learning and respect. So we also request that your microphones and cameras be turned off during the webinar to avoid any interruptions. Please write your full name, country, and organization in the chat box so that we can learn of where you are joining us from. Those who are joining by Facebook streaming can also write your names and type in your comments and questions in the comment section. You can also type your questions in the Zoom chat, and please limit your questions or focus your question on the topics of today's presentation. All questions will be addressed or might be addressed at the end of the presentation. And please feel free to ask any questions you have to leave this space at the end. We also want to mention that the opinions expressed are sole responsibility of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the opinion or position of Marfund. We also have the Marfund grievance mechanism that we want to share with you. If you take a screen capture or scan the QR code on screen, if you need to use our grievance mechanism, you can do so. So now we're going to hear from Steve Canty, who's going to give the words of welcome.
Thank you, Ana Beatriz. Apologies, I'm going to do this one in English. So hello and welcome to this mini webinar series about coastal wetlands hosted by the Mar Fund. As Ana Beatriz said, I'm Steve Canty, the Director of Marine Geo, a program based at the Smithsonian Institution. Today's webinar focuses on seagrasses, an often overlooked ecosystem, and is the second of two webinars focusing on coastal wetlands. Last month, we discussed mangroves, the recording of which is available on the Mar Fund website. As many of us know, coastal wetlands, which includes mangroves and seagrasses, both play an important role for the biodiversity and people of the Mesoamerican Reef region and throughout Central America, providing a host of ecosystem services, with fisheries and coastal resilience being of great importance to coastal communities. Additionally, coastal wetlands have a critical role as a natural climate solution through carbon sequestration and are often referred to as blue carbon ecosystems. While coastal wetlands were once just under the purview of the Ramsar Convention, more recently, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, specifically nationally determined contributions, and the Convention on Biological Diversity through the National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plans have increased government attention on both mangroves and seagrasses. This provides an important opportunity to leverage three conventions in the support of the protection and restoration of coastal wetlands, which all of the Mar and Central American countries have done. This leads us to our three great presenters for today, Alexis Rodriguez Matute, Nadia Bood, and Cecilia Caliono, who will be highlighting some of the fantastic work that's been done over the past years in the Mar and throughout Central America to increase our understanding of coastal wetlands, specifically seagrasses, all of which are moving us towards specific national targets set out under one or more of the three international conventions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Alexis Rodriguez Matute. He's a research professor in the Department of Soils at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Honduras, Atlantida campus, known as CULA. He holds a master's degree in water sciences and also in business administration. At CULA, he leads the implementation of a quality management system for the accreditation of the soil and environmental analysis laboratories under ISO standards. He's a member of two research groups, aquatic ecosystems with an emphasis on marine coastal zones, and also soil use management and conservation. His research interests include the evaluation of sediment rates, sediment core dating, soil and sediment quality, and blue carbon in marine and coastal ecosystems, in addition to aquatic macroinvertebrate biodiversity and ecotoxicology. He has participated in various university and community outreach projects and research initiatives related to water quality, environmental quality, and carbon sequestration in both mangroves and seagrasses throughout the Honduran Caribbean. Over to you, Alexis. Adelante.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. And now I'm going to present and show you my presentation on screen. Okay, my presentation is called Carbon Capturing in Coastal Marine Ecosystems with an Experience we have had in the National University in the north coast of Honduras. First, I'm going to focus on carbon, which is a very abundant element that is found in many forms. One is a free form as carbon, diamond, graphite, and combined in the atmospheric level in gases, CO2, at the level of rocks and carbonated rocks. And we also find it underground as petroleum, and carbon is highly abundant in all over the universe. Regarding carbon sequestration or CO2, we have three ecosystems that are able to capture them: mangroves, marisms, and seagrasses. And these are being marshes as well, so apologies. So these are capturing gradually this element year by year, decade by decade, and millennia by millennia. And they are able to capture 5 to 10 times more carbon than any other land ecosystems. For example, any broadleaf forest or any area of the planet. These ecosystems, through photosynthesis, are able to capture this in its biomass and can concentrate being captured in the sediments throughout the whole coastal line. And it is a very well designed system. These systems are capable of capturing a great proportion of carbon. So seagrass, CO2 is dissolved in water. And through the sunlight and photosynthetic processes is able to generate carbohydrates, and oxygen is liberated. That is why these systems are highly productive and are the birth of many species and are able to capture carbon efficiently. If we compare it with other land and coastal ecosystems, these have a highly seagrass have a high capacity of carbon sequestration, and in comparison to mangroves, which are lower but have a high capacity of sediment capturing, and are also there's less intervention than mangroves commonly. These are mangroves are more exposed to human intervention. Compared to tropical forests, these ecosystems are, in comparison, high in the capture. This live biomass of carbon sequestration can be captured in years and decades. However, sediments can take centuries and millennia to be intervened. If there are oxidation processes, these that are in contact with oxygen, then this whole system can be in contact with the atmosphere. Existence of or a presence of carbon, blue carbon, there is a climate change mitigation and human well-being. That is why we need policy and rules and funding to be able to preserve these ecosystems. That is why there is a need for an understanding of the current situation and prior situation of these systems and these systems, then measure the existence of carbon in areas and accumulate the accumulation rate and be able to estimate possible carbon emissions resulting in changes and any possible changes that can occur in this landscape. In our campus, there are several projects that are related to this coastal marine environment. Since 2015, we began studies with the ecosystems, and our first experience began with precisely with seagrass. We began with a group of teachers and professors to be interested in mangroves in 2013. And there was a workshop that was given by LSU, and Insebio presented this proposal to study carbon sequestration, and where we, however, did not have the necessary inputs or equipment to be able to conduct this research. And we began with a method, a very basic method with carbon analyzers and then ozone emissions, which is what we are establishing now in our campus in Atlantida. In our first experience, which was in Tela Bay, in the Guaymoreto Lagoon in Trujillo in 2017, 2018, we went into the sea and started exploring Tela Bay because we knew of the presence of these marine prairies and these seagrass beds, and made a study with a baseline to be able to understand the data that we could collect because it was a shallow bay, 3-4 meter depth, allowing diving to be accessible and be able to learn greatly of blue carbon evaluation of seagrass. So we evaluated the area and were able to conduct capture satellite images and calculate the area of the zone, and be able to understand seagrass and also carbon importing and carbon loss and how much was being exported from the system, and understand how much carbon was retained, understanding this dynamics in the bay. Our experience with regarding biomass was successful. We were able to take 32 samples of live biomass with live rhizome and roots. We had a small issue in that we were only able to capture 8 samples or collect 8 samples with a meter. But however, the substrate was high levels of sand and had to perform a 40 centimeter cut. But that was our experience, and we were and what we achieved. Regarding methodology, we took into account biomass, the rhizome, leaf, and root, sediments, and residue were considered. Epiphytes was also taken into consideration to scrape and be able to avoid any false positives and be able to not and to understand what was being collected. Sediments were collected through different nucleators. This nucleator began, but was not very efficient in sandy substrates, but was what the tool we used. And residue was collected with local material and calcarean algae. And we had to be taking into consideration live biomass and dead biomass. In our studies, we had to design several type of equipment. Our nucleator was called or was given the nickname the MEC 1801, where we were able to take out the sedimentary nuclei in a very a clean manner and be able to. So that is what we designed. Our results: the amount of live biomass was 3.3 with a 1.69 milligrams per of carbon per hectare and with 29 samples. Regarding sediment of 8 sites, there were as a rank of 2,342 milligrams of carbon and 88,000. There's a lot more to be done regarding the design of the nucleator. Something we learned was the design that the collaboration with the FIU, where we learned about another design of nucleator, and it was something we worked with Bikautila to. They invited us to participate in this experience of carbon capturing, and it was very interesting because with this project of CARICAS, with a network of scientists in the Caribbean to collect data of seagrass and a meter of depth, where we were able to evaluate the scope and variation in environmental factors, integrate data field and mapping in seagrass. And I think his internet is a little unstable. Let's wait a bit.
We will have to thank Alexis in his absence and hand over to Nadia Bood, our second presenter. So Nadia is a senior program officer at WWF Mesoamerica, where she leads and oversees research programs that support coastal ecosystem conservation and restoration across Belize and the wider Mesoamerican region. Her work focuses on marine spatial planning, ecosystem service analysis and valuation, vulnerability assessments, and climate change adaptation, blue carbon, national policy development, and other applied research initiatives that inform WWF's conservation priorities. In addition to her technical role and leadership, Nadia provides support to colleagues, partners, and collaborators and serves as head of WWF's Field Program Office in Belize. Nadia's worked with WWF for almost 20 years. Prior to joining this team. She held several key positions, including lecturer in the Natural Resource Management program at the University College of Belize, which is now the University of Belize. Was an environmental technician at the Belize Department of the Environment and reef biologist and head of the Coral Reef Monitoring Unit at the Belize Coastal Zone Management Institute. She's been active in the environment and conservation field since 1996 and has made significant contributions to marine conservation efforts in Belize. And I know that to be true because I've had the pleasure of working with Nadia for a number of years. So welcome, Nadia, and over to you.
Thank you, Steve, for that warm introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Just give me a brief moment to pull up my presentation. So good afternoon once again, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to be able to be here with you this afternoon to pretty much share on our progress towards developing a national seagrass policy for Belize. I must say that this policy is something that is driven by the government of Belize as well, through the Fisheries Department and the Ministry of Marine Conservation and Blue Economy. So, like elsewhere, seagrass, of course, have many benefits, both from an environmental and an economic perspective. For Belize, seagrass, of course, are very important because they function as nurseries and fishing grounds for many commercially important fish species. So in that light, they are able to provide habitats and support livelihoods related to the fishing sector. They are also important from a marine biodiversity perspective because they provide shelter and habitat for critical marine species, including marine turtles, manatees, and crabs, lobster, you name it. They also help to filter pollutants running off from the mainland, so they help to support improved water quality. They also are very important economically wise as it relates to the tourism sector, knowing that a lot of tourism activities also happens within upon seagrass ecosystems because of the biodiversity that can be found within these systems. And so doing, they also support livelihoods, and the economy related to tourism. Seagrass also are very important from a climate perspective because they're able to function as a good carbon sink. And Alexis touched on this earlier as well, no? The fact that these ecosystems are so efficient at sequestering carbon. So they are very good in terms of mitigating climate risks. And as well, they help to support coastal protection, helping to buffer impacts related to erosion associated with storm events as well. But even though seagrass provides so many benefits, they are also very threatened. There are a number of key drivers that are impacting seagrass ecosystems within Belize and the wider Mesoamerican region. Such drivers include sediment runoffs owed to agriculture and deforestation activities, which results in eroded sediment and contaminated sediment being driven into the marine environment, reducing water quality, and also the sunlight that seagrass needs to photosynthesize. They are also been impacted by physical damage related to the use of fish traps and fish nets and anchors. Although such impacts are localized, over time they can have significant impact on the connectivity, the extent of and health of seagrass ecosystems. Another key driver is marine transportation, where seagrass have been impacted by both propellers cutting off the seagrass blades, creating scarring within the seagrass habitats as well. In addition to this, seagrass are also impacted by fuel leaks from both engines over time as well. And one of the increasingly emerging threat is sargassum. We've seen increased influxes of sargassums within this region, which in themselves are having impact on seagrass ecosystems by blocking sunlight and reducing oxygen in the water overlying seagrass ecosystems. And these overall, create significant stressful conditions for seagrass ecosystems. So we know that seagrass are very important, but they are also facing a lot of threats. And hence why having a management policy for seagrass is very important. Having a policy can help to alleviate some of the threats that we are seeing seagrass being impacted by. A policy can also help in terms of protecting the habitats and nurture areas that are very important for critical fish species, many of which are very important from a commercial perspective. They can also help to safeguard coastal protection. So having a policy can put in measures in place that can help to increase sustainable management of seagrass and those drivers of change that are having an impact on seagrass ecosystems. It can also help to maintain, water quality, support climate actions. As I mentioned before, and also the previous speaker, that mentioned that seagrass are very important as a carbon sequestration habitat. As well, they will, having a policy can ensure that we can continue to attain the goods and services related to the economic sector from tourism, from the blue economy. But most of all, seagrass can help us to ensure that we put in place the critical measures that are important to improve management of these ecosystems, both from a rules perspective and from an enforcement perspective. So just to give you an idea of where we are in terms of the development process for the policy, we started to work on this policy last year in 2025, and the process have been a very stepwise one where we have different workflows. The first workflow dealt with making sure that we are able to understand the current situation as it relates to the condition and extent of seagrass within the country. So we were able to gather information on habitat risk and connectivity within the seagrass ecosystems. We've been able to gather information related to what are some of the critical stress factors that are increasing risk to seagrass ecosystems. We look at the MPAs and what the condition of seagrasses are within the boundaries of those MPAs and marine protected areas, that is, and understanding whether marine protected areas are helping to support seagrass ecosystem health and connectivity and functionality. And then we've also been able to collect some of the information from stakeholders, from researchers, from managers, so that we can then analyze those to be able to start looking at this workflow tool that looked at criteria and ranking and weighting. Under workflow 2, this is where we currently are. We've been able to analyze ecosystem services provided by seagrass ecosystems, understand where the degraded seagrass areas are, try to understand what the protection opportunities are for seagrass ecosystems. And then we were working with local stakeholders and local communities as well to help us to rank, what the critical threats are to seagrass ecosystems and how we can then implement measures to try to alleviate those threats. Under workflow 3, that relates to prioritization and mapping of critical areas that we can include within the policy to be able to mitigate impacts to seagrass ecosystems. So all of this information will be analyzed together, carry out comparative analysis, and the findings from those will then be integrated into a national seagrass management policy for the country that will be supported by a monitoring and evaluation plan as well. When it comes to the prioritization analysis, we are looking at different factors because we want to understand what the values are for seagrass ecosystems. So we are looking at habitat risk to seagrass ecosystems. Then we are also looking at the ecological value of seagrass ecosystems. What are the values, the social and cultural values provided by, considered to be provided by seagrass ecosystems, and as well the economic values. So all of these are then combined, analyzed, and then we are utilizing those to create this management criteria for integration within the policy. So we're looking at identifying management criteria and critical actions that can be implemented. When we think about potential actions, and this by no means mean that it's going to be restricted to these, but we are looking at protection. What kind of policies or interventions or frameworks might be needed to be able to mitigate impacts to seagrass ecosystems to increase their protection? Are there opportunities for restoring seagrass ecosystems given their importance at particular locations? What are some of the measures we can implement to advance conservation of these ecosystems? And what could be the role of local communities and local stakeholders in supporting conservation, management, and monitoring of seagrass ecosystems? But overall, what we hope to attain through this policy too is to be able to implement measures that can mitigate the current risks and impacts to seagrass ecosystems. I mentioned that we are taking a very stepwise approach. So what we are hoping to get, and we've been making good progress on these, of course, is to, from a management perspective, meet the management goal of having such a policy, meaning that we want to be able to identify technically sound management criteria for integration within the policy. And those criteria will then be ranked to be able to understand which interventions might be the best to have the greatest impact in promoting sustainable management and protection of seagrass habitats within the country. We are looking at looking at compiling, spatial data layers, creating habitat maps, and then, validating those maps with stakeholders. We are also mapping the critical actors and what role these actors can play in promoting sustainable management and protection of seagrass ecosystems from a national to the local level. And what are the policy contexts? What kind of policies, national policies, might need to be put in place to support improved management of seagrass ecosystems? And we are ranking, as I mentioned before, the risks, the human risks, the human-driven risks to seagrass ecosystems, assessing, the values associated to the benefits provided by seagrass ecosystems. What are the social-cultural locations that we need to, what are the locations we need to focus on from a socio-cultural perspective? And most of all, we want to be able to identify priority areas, where the greatest risks are and where the greatest intervention might be possible to promote protection of seagrass ecosystems. So what we've been doing also is that we are trying, we've been assessing the resilience potential of seagrass ecosystems within Belize across the space of the country. We are also looking at the exposure levels of critical stress and the consequences caused by these stress on these different stress factors on the health and fecundity of seagrass ecosystem within the country. When we look at resilience, we look at how or what kind of recruitment rate across Belize's seagrass habitats exists within the country. What is the regeneration potential of seagrass ecosystem within the country. So these particular indicators are cross-referenced with the extent of the seagrass habitat within the country. What we found in terms of resilience is that there is good, connectivity among seagrass ecosystems still within the country. The scoring that you can see here, we rank them from 1 to 3, with 3 being the highest scoring received for the particular indicator. We look at a total of 8 stress factors that exist on seagrass ecosystems. The first 6 are shown on this slide. The first being agriculture runoff. And we found that agriculture runoff have a strong overlap with the extent of seagrass ecosystem within the country, which means that agriculture have a significant impact on seagrass extent, and health within Belize. We through our analysis, we found that agricultural runoff have the potential of impacting the health of seagrass ecosystems within Belize on an order of 8 to 12 months per year. So that's considered very significant. In terms of aquaculture, we found that the frequency of disturbance is very high at point source area of impact when it comes to agricultural activities, with impact level being high, occurring annually or even less often. So in terms of the extent of habitat of seagrass ecosystems, the opportunity of agricultural point sources of impact to seagrass is also considered very high, occurring on the order of 8 to 12 months per year as well. In terms of development impact on seagrass, we found that there is a high frequency of disturbance, development disturbance on seagrass ecosystems across Belize, across the entire habitats with seagrass habitat within the country. Also, the overlap in terms of impacts is on the order of 8 to 12 months as well. In terms of management effectiveness of these first 3 threat factors, the management effectiveness currently is somewhat effective, but much more improvement, much more needs to be done to improve management of these systems. In terms of marine dredging, there is also a high impact of dredging activities. These on seagrass habitats, happening on an order of 10 to 100% loss within the country. And this is impacting not only the extent of seagrass ecosystems, but also the structure of the seagrass habitats themselves. Management effectiveness is also considered to be somewhat effective, but much more needs to be done to better manage dredging within seagrass ecosystems within the country, within and buffering seagrass ecosystems. Fishing activity also shows to have some impact on seagrass ecosystems. Although it is localized, we found that it can occur, at a high level as well. In terms of recreation, the impact is less so, and it's also considered to be management is also considered to be somewhat effective. In terms of the last 2 stressors, transportation and sargassum, transportation is also having an impact on seagrass ecosystems, marine transportation from both activities, for example. They overlap in terms of transportation because we have marine transportation happening in many locations across the space and scale of seagrass ecosystem within the country. So the potential for impact from marine transportation is very high. And finally, sargassum ecosystems. This is considered to be, causing significant impacts on seagrass ecosystems. And unfortunately, the management of the impact of sargassum on seagrass ecosystems is currently not effective. Much more needs to be done, recognizing that this is a natural factor, a natural stress factors. It will require much more coordinated interventions to have a meaningful impact in terms of mitigation.
Nadia, I'm sorry to interrupt because I know you've got a lot more to share, but in due to how much time we've got left, I'm gonna maybe in the question and answer, you're able to fill out a little bit more of what you've done here, just so that we have enough time for Cecilia to present as well, if that's okay.
Sure, that's okay, Steve.
Sorry to interrupt, though. I love all of this work, but I'm going to say thank you for now. And we're going to now hand over to Cecilia uh, Caledonio, who is a project officer at the Centro de Estudios Marinos, which is an organization very close to my heart. I spent about 7 years working there, so it's great to have somebody from there presenting today. But back to Cecilia, she's a biologist passionate about working in environmental conservation and with coastal communities. Her work focuses on the restoration of both mangroves and seagrasses and the coordination of technical and education activities aimed at the protection of marine and coastal ecosystems. She enjoys both fieldwork research and the creation of initiatives that generate positive impact on the environment and people. So welcome, Cecilia. Adelante.
And I thank you for inviting me to this opportunity to share part of the experience that we are conducting with the Center for Marine Studies with a seagrass active restoration pilot program in Trujillo Bay in Honduras. Right from the start, this study began with a participatory approach, ensuring that the communities of the municipalities of Trujillo and Santa Fe would be well involved and acquainted with all our activities, including the local government and local and government institutions, who are also play an essential role in this project. These are key stakeholders that are essential, that are part of the communities. Given that sustainability is important, the methodology we used is a fish forever methodology using photo quadrants to assess coverage and biodiversity of seagrass in the Trujillo Bay, as well as the municipality of Santa Fe seagrass. We conducted a, a core extraction with 2070 centimeter Caracas cores or nucleators, and we have been experimenting changes in this pilot program, measuring physical parameters, chemical parameters that are important, like pH, oxygen, and nutrients that determine ecological conditions of the prairies, and be able to select the best sites and that are ideal for the efforts of restoration in this pilot program. As you can see on screen, we have several sites where we can find seagrass beds throughout the Bay of Trujillo with a barrier of 2.2 square kilometers. What we did prior to the pilot was to do some field visits to assess the seagrass bed and be able to identify some essential criteria to determine the sites. So, and identify some positive and negative elements or criteria. The selection of the site is essential because it determines greatly what the success will be of this active restoration or failure. So here in the Bay, we prioritize sites that had good water quality, low sedimentation levels, and an ecological connectivity that was very important. We also avoided sites that had anthropogenic pressure that was high or physical conditions that were not optimal. With the community's support, we conducted this site selection, and with this criteria being developed throughout a period of time, we were able to select the ideal sites to carry out the pilot project. Some sites were not selected despite communities being interested in carrying out restoration activities because due to certain criteria that I'm sharing on screen and some other and factors. As you can see, we needed a donor site to conduct a restoration of a degraded site. So the site that is the donor had to be a healthy prairie with low anthropogenic pressure or any diseases, presence of disease. We're, we were able to determine also the amount of coverage thanks to photo quadrants with a greater than 70% coverage. Something else that was important was the assessment of a site, but not extracting the core or the clusters to affect the prairies. What we did was evaluate the density and the health status of the cluster and able to extract one single nucleus or cluster, and were able to evaluate this and be able to extract clusters without affecting the seagrass bed. For the receptor site, we had several conditions assessed. These sand patches were assessed within the prairie where there was low amount of or low abundance of seagrass or absence of this species, as is the one we studied, which is the one mentioned on screen, Testudinium. So at the moment of the outplanting of the clusters, we had to be able to manage this successfully. Another important element is that the recepting site has to be environmentally similar to the donor site. So some parameters were, for example, same depth, light salinity, and current. It is all near shore. It is near the Trujillo municipality, in the municipality area, in the prairie, and all these assessments are conducted prior to restoration. As I mentioned, we conducted photo quadrant assessments. Within this photo quadrant, we analyzed presence or absence of certain organisms, density of the seagrass, and be able to have a full assessment. Here you can see some images of the health status of the seagrass bed and in Trujillo and some organisms that were found. And the two municipalities that we were working in, Trujillo in the Trujillo department, remember, were evaluated. The evaluation of the Trujillo Bay compared to the seagrass bed in Santa Fe municipality were highly different. There were significant differences. This is the Santa Fe status of the seagrass with a totally different coverage than Trujillo because of anthropogenic pressure that is affecting seagrass in this municipality of Santa Fe. So this assessment in the field were essential to be able to determine if we were able to conduct a restoration pilot, active restoration pilot. However, we are not doing so currently due to the current conditions of the seagrass in this municipality. To be able to understand the reality of what we were facing, we conducted a analysis of threat to help us determine the situation, to understand the differences and why they were so different. One of the main lessons that we learned is that active restoration cannot be seen in an isolated manner. It cannot be just, you cannot neglect the threats. We have to face these threats in both municipalities that we were uh, targeting or focusing to be able to understand what was our results. This analysis of threats helped us identify some sources of water that was being discharged into the ecosystem that needed to be treated. There is also many sediments in Santa Fe. There's dredging, land use change, runoff, and all this led us to think or to analyze that this Santa Fe pilot initiative was basically it would lead to extracting or outplanting these clusters that would be not leading to any positive results. So the restoration efforts that we are conducting in the moment are active restoration and passive restoration. This analysis led us to be able to determine the type of restoration that we were going to be carrying out in each of the municipalities. Despite passive restoration being so important and more economic, more cost effective, we needed to identify sites that had more direct intervention in the municipality of Trujillo because degradation was like an injury or like a lesion in the seagrass bed. So that is why the pilot was established in Trujillo municipality. These are some general steps that were taken: analysis of pressures and threats of sites, selection of the type of restoration efforts, planning and design, and implementation of active and or passive restoration. Then the monitoring and documentation section or phase after piloting the efforts was essential. Maintenance of the implementation and feedback process for adaptation and improvement of the methodology as well. As you can see on screen, we carried out a 2 by 4 meter quadrant and conducted outplanting efforts as you can see on screen. Something that is important to mention is that when conducting the cluster extraction to ensure there was no sediments being affected, we had a bag that was used with some element called a bramante, which was used to maintain the health of the substrate, and that so that the outplanting was effective. What we're using is this nucleator, PVC nucleator, or a seed marker. We introduce this 60 in the depth of 60 centimeters and conduct the extraction of this nucleus to ensure that the whole all the structure is intact without removing any elements of the seagrass to ensure a healthy nucleus and be able to outplant it to a site that needs restoration. As I mentioned, the location is the protected area of the Waimareto Lagoon in the Banco de las Estrellas and Malpaso Bank. We had several groups of groups of work divided in groups of 4 because it's a low number of people to be able to focus well in our activities and not affect the seagrass bed, involving communities as well. Also, the Navy, Honduran Navy forces, community leaders, municipal leaders, the Institute of Forest Conservation, and others were involved in the process. As I mentioned, we conducted a safe extraction of the clusters and introduced it in casing and nested them in plastic containers and took them in a boat to the restoration site. And here you can see some images of the participants. And now, after this outplanting of these clusters, we were able to carry out monitoring and follow-up efforts to be able to analyze the results and make improvements in the methodology, which can be more effective. We were able to carry out the planting and 30 days later carry out an assessment of, and some of the variables that were measured were survival, percentage of living nucleus, growth, and health. One of these nucleus produced new leaves, and then we were able to see the rooting process was in the substrate. We wanted to ensure that they were also not only rooted in the casing, but also in the sand.
We are very close. Well, we're over time already. So I'm going to have to interrupt you as well, I'm afraid, Balong.
Okay.
Um,
Yes, no problem.
because if it's okay with everybody, we will go on for
Wait.
another eight or eight or so minutes to 3:10, just so that we can have some time for questions from the audience before we need to end for today. But before we hand over to questions, I just want to say thank you to all three of you. Great job. And Alexis, glad that you could make it back. Sorry that your internet cut out. But I hope everybody was able to follow along to the three great presentations today. So thank you very much, all three of you. I do believe we have Ana Beatriz, we have a question for Alexis in the chat.
Okay, there's a question in the chat. And I also would like to thank you for your attendance and to tell you also that the complete presentation of each of the presenters, whom we thank very much for their presentations. We're so sorry time went so fast. So we will have the presentations on Marfan's site and the webinar section, and you can finish revising them and contact each one of them. So following with the questions at the beginning of your presentation, they asked us for the monitoring that you did in the Trujillo Bay, what protocols did you follow? And you were mentioning that you also collaborated with the Caritas project. And what was the protocol? Yes, thank you for that question. We used the coastal blue carbon and the protocol that is mentioned. And we basically were based on the bibliographical recopilation that this manual has, which is used at global level. And so basically this was the estimation in my case. I'm only part of a fabulous team of colleagues, and I just happen to be the one that coordinates the carbon section. So I use this protocol of the cost of blue carbon and blue carbon in Spanish, and describes about the live biomass, the dead biomass, which is autochthonous and allotona, and also the sediment, which is preferably at 1 meter distance, and it explains how the substrate that when it becomes further from the coastal line, it becomes more sandy, it's more complex, and that is a challenge because we had to continue designing a prototype of a nucleator that will allow us to prevent the loss of the integrated sample of the integrated nucleus. Thank you, Alexis. For Cecilia, what was your greatest challenge for the restoration of these of the seagrass? Well, just to mention one is a little difficult to choose. However, one of the greatest challenges was to evaluate the seagrass in Santa Fe because they're at quite a depth, a depth over 8 meters. And the greatest challenge was to tell the community that they were not able to, they could not come with us because you need to have the license for diving, the diver's license, and other factors that may limit this community participation. And we have had this closeness to the community. We've been able to have the participation of the authorities, and above all, this participation was it was really a challenge to tell them that they were not able to accompany us when we went out. So because they were engaged from the beginning, They know the project, they know what they're doing and what is being done. And so that was basically the greatest challenge that we've had so far. Thank you, Cecilia. Another question for you. How did you control the stress factors in the site of the donor? How did you control these stress factors? Well, for this, as I mentioned before, we evaluated the area very well, the area from which we were extracting them, for that to be able to reduce the impact that we may have, that we could have. Also, because we're often asked this question, we're doing other studies, carrying out other studies too, that we hope to share very soon. And these other studies will help us to determine and see how we can have the minimum reduction and to reduce to the minimum the damage that could be caused to this ecosystem. We were managing small groups. We're also placing traps of sedimentation along the site where we are working. And little by little, as we are progressing, we are improving all the techniques that we are using, and we're also learning from other and listening to other experts in the region that are managing and doing this kind of piloting. So we are enriching our knowledge and applying this knowledge to the piloting that we have in the bay.
Gracias, Cecilia. I have one question for Nadia, and then I think this will be the last one before we need to close. But for other countries that are potentially thinking about doing a national seagrass policy, what are one or two lessons learned from your process so far that you would like to share with others?
Sure. Definitely, the process has to be science informed. It requires a lot of information for us to fully understand the extent and stress factors and the level of those factors. But most importantly, the process has to be inclusive. It shouldn't be a top-down process, but more of a bottom-up, a combined bottom-up and top-down process, because the local communities and local stakeholders have a lot to bring to the table. They have their lives, their livelihood tied to these ecosystems, and they are very much interested in seeing that these ecosystems remain healthy and functional over time. In our consultations, we've also learned from them that they want to play a meaningful role in helping to contribute to monitoring and management of these ecosystems too.
Thank you very much to our distinguished speakers. Steve, for your participation, and applause to everybody, and applause for everybody. We thank everybody for accompanying us in this webinar. We have to close now, but we invite you to consult our webpage, and you will find the mangrove webinar, and soon we will also upload today's webinar. We wish you a very happy rest of the day.